Alright guys, so in this video I'm going to go over the Unit 3 study guide for the fraction test. This is the fraction practice test that you received and should be studying from for your test. So I'm going to go over each of the answers so you'll have a chance to see how I find all the answers and to also check your answers that you got. Alright, so for the first one, what is the sum of 1/3 and 1/6? Now sum we know means adding, so and also we can see the addition sign here. So we are going to be adding 1/3 plus 1/6. But in order to do that, we need to find common denominators first. We cannot add two fractions that have different denominators, so we need to make each of these have the same denominator. So I can see that 3 can actually go into 6, so I'm going to use 6 as my common denominator here. Here we don't have to change anything about the fraction, we're basically just moving it over. But here we need to find the connection between 3 and 6. And in order to go from 3 to 6, you multiply by 2. 3 times 2 is 6, so we have to multiply by 2 on the top as well. And 1 times 2 is 2. So now we add together our two numerators. 2 plus 1 is 3. And we don't actually do anything to the denominator, we just bring down that same denominator. So we end up with the answer 3/6. And on the practice test, that would mean B. So 3/6 is the answer for that question number 1. All right, so now let's look at question number 2. Marty created a line plot of the cups of flour different recipes call for. How many more cups of flour does the recipe that calls for the most have than the recipe that calls for the least? Okay, so how many more tells me that this is going to be a subtraction problem. We need to find the difference. So we need to also find that the recipe that calls for the most and the recipe that calls for the least. So those are the two things that I want to find first, the recipe that calls for the most and the recipe that calls for the least. So the recipe that calls for the most would be 1.5 cups, and the recipe that calls for the least would be 1/4 of a cup. So there's actually 3 recipes that call for 1/4, but that is the least amount. So those are the two amounts that we need to subtract. So 1 1/2 minus 1/4. And here again, we cannot subtract two fractions that have two different denominators, so I need to find common denominators here. But when we're looking at 2 and 4, that's pretty easy because 2 can go into 4, so I'm going to make 4 our common denominator here. Just bring that 1 over because that fraction isn't changing at all. 2 times 2 gives me 4, and 1 times 2 gives me 2. So again, we're subtracting, so 2 minus 1 is 1, and just bring down that denominator. And then 1 minus 0 is 1, so our answer is 1 1/4 cups. But if we look at our answer choices here, we have 1 1/4 is A, and that is our answer A. Okay, so let's go down to number 3. I like to highlight my questions as I go. It makes me focus on what exactly the question is asking me. So let's see. Will the fraction 3/4 make each equation true? So basically, you need to figure out if those two problems, problem A and problem B, will both equal to 3/4. All right, so first we'll label letter A, 2/6 minus 1/12. And what we want to do is find out if that will equal 3/4. So again, we need to find a common denominator here. And 6 goes into 12, so let's just use 12. Here, 12 is turning into 12, so we don't actually have to change anything. But 6 times 2 gives me 12, and 2 times 2 is 4. So 4 minus 1 is 3. And we bring down our same denominator, and we end up with 3/12. That is not 3/4. Even if we were to simplify this fraction or divide both sides by 3, we would end up with 1/4. So this does not equal 3/4, so this is a no. All right, and then let's look at B. 1/3 plus 5/10. find a common denominator here, and a common denominator for 10 and 30 would probably just be 30. I'm sorry, 10 and 3 would be 30. So let's make 30 our denominator here. 10 times 3 is 30, and 5 times 3 is 15. 3 times 10 is 30. 1 times 10 is 10. So if we add these together, we end up with 25 30ths. Now, obviously that does not equal 3/4, but we can try and simplify it and see if it will end up being 3/4 after it gets simplified. So when I'm looking at 25 and 30, I can tell that one number that goes into both of those is 5. So we can simplify both of these sides by 5. And 25 divided by 5 is 5. 30 divided by 5 is 6. So we end up with 5/6, and that is not 3/4. So again, this is no. All right. Let's go on to number 4. Okay. So here we have a word problem, and I don't want you to be intimidated or frustrated when you see a problem that is quite long like this, because just because it's long does not mean that it's hard. It just means that it requires you to read a little bit and maybe stop and think about it for a few extra minutes. But here, let's read the problem. Number 4, Tom wants to walk for 24 miles or less on some hiking trails. The tables show the distances of the 3 different trails he can ride on. So the 3 trails are Black Bear, Eagle Ridge, and Doe Run. Choose the 2 combinations of trails that Tom can walk for 24 miles or less. Okay, so here are our 5 options. And really, what I would do in this situation is to actually do the math for each one of these 5 and decide if any of these ends up being less than 24 miles. So Black Bear is 7.5 miles. Eagle Ridge is 10 1/4 miles, and Doe Run is 8 3/4 miles. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at A, and this is how I would set up my work if I were you. I would just label A as being Doe Run 3 times, which is 8 3/4, 8 3/4, 8 3/4. I would add them up and see if it's going to be less than 24 miles. But there actually is a shortcut in this situation, because I know if I add 8 plus 8 plus 8, that's going to give me 24 in itself. What we need to know is which one of these combinations will Tom walk 24 miles or less. This is obviously going to be more than 24 miles, so A cannot be one of the answers. Okay, so let's move on to B. We didn't even need to add these up. We can see already that it's going to be more than 24, which will not work. All right, so letter B. Eagle Ridge 2 times. So Eagle Ridge is 10 1/4 and 10 1/4, because remember, it's Eagle Ridge 2 times. So 10 1/4 plus 10 1/4, we already have common denominators as 4, so we don't even need to change anything. We'll just add the 2 numerators. 1 plus 1 is 2, and bring down that same denominator 4. 10 plus 10 is 20. So this actually does work. 20 2/4 of a mile, or 20 1/2 of a mile, is less than 24. So that works. I'm going to circle B because that is one of the answers. Okay. So let's go ahead to C. Black Bear 2 times, which is 7.5 and 7.5, and Eagle Ridge 1 time, 10 1/4. Add these together. Well, I'm looking at this, and already I can see 7 plus 7 is 14, and then 14 plus 10 is going to be 24. So again, we're in a situation where we already have 24 just from the whole numbers. If we add up the fractions, we're going to end up with more than 24. So that can't be the answer, because again, remember, we're looking for 24 miles or less. So C cannot be the answer. Okay, D. Black Bear 1 time, which is 7.5, and do run 2 times, which is 8 3/4, 8 3/4. Okay, so let's try adding these together. When I'm looking at them, there's no obvious reason why this couldn't be the answer, so I'm going to go ahead and do the work here. We have our denominators are 4, 4, and 2, so I am going to have to find a common denominator for this top one because this is the only one that needs to change into a fraction with the denominator of 4. 2 times 2 is 4, 1 times 2 is 2, so now I just add up the numerators, 2, 3, and 3, and I end up with 8/4. And then I add up my whole numbers. 8 plus 8 is 16, and 16 plus 7 is going to be 23. All right, but here I have an improper fraction, so I need to turn this into a mixed number. So I'm going to put my division sign right next to my denominator and bring that 8 inside. 4 goes into 8 twice. 4 times 2 is 8, so I end up with no remainder. So this is a whole number now, so the whole number gets carried over to the whole number side, and 23 plus 2 turns out to be 25. And remember, there's no fraction because we didn't end up with a remainder. So the total mileage for this combination is going to be 25, which means it's too much. It's too many miles, so that's not going to work. All right, so then let's check the last one now. We are going to be finding 2 combinations. We already have 1, so we can almost assume that the last one is going to be correct, but we never want to just assume because we could have made a mistake at some point, so we always want to double check. So let's just go ahead and try and solve E. So Eagle Ridge 1 time, which is 10 1/4, and Doe Run 1 time, 8 3/4. Okay, so let's add these together. We're lucky here we have 2 common denominators already, so we're just going to add the numerators. 3 plus 1 is 4, 4/4, and then 10 plus 8 is 18. 18 4/4, since 4/4 is really equal to 1 whole, this is technically 19 miles. So 19 is less than 24, which means E is correct. So our answers here are B and E. All right. Let's move down to number 5. Okay. All right. Donnie hiked 3 3/5 of a mile on Saturday and 1 7/10 on Sunday. How many miles did he hike in all? In all tells me we definitely are going to be adding. All right, so we're taking 3 3/5 and adding 1 7/10. Here we have 10 and 5 are our denominators, which means we need to find a common denominator since they're different. 5 can fit into 10, so let's just use 10 as our denominator. It's always best to use the lowest common denominator. It makes our math problems much easier. So 10 isn't changing, so we're not going to change the top. We're just going to bring that 7 right over. 5 times 2 is 10, and 3 times 2 is 6. So now we're going to add 6 plus 7 is 13, and then we're going to bring down our denominator 10. Okay, 3 plus 1 is 4. And here we have an improper fraction, so we need to turn this into a mixed number and then make sure we add it to our original fraction here. So we're going to pull the 13 into our division bar. 10 goes into 13 once. 10 times 1 is 10. Subtract, and we get 3. So now we have our 3 numbers, and this is equal to 1 3/10. So we're going to pull this whole number over here and carry it above the 4, and this fraction part becomes part of our answer. So 3/10 comes down here. That 1 carried over to the whole numbers, and 4 plus 1 is 5. So our final answer is 5 3/10. And if we look here, our answer here is C, 5 3/10 is correct. So C is our answer. Okay. And then number 6. Choose the 2 expressions. Okay, so that's really important. Choose the 2 expressions that have a sum or difference of 2/3. So there's actually going to be two answers here. All right, so we are going to have to go through each one of these answers, find the sum or difference, and see if it equals out to 2/3. All right, so let's start with A. 1/2 plus 1/6. We need a common denominator here. 2 can fit into 6, so let's just use 6. This fraction staying the same. This fraction needs to change though, so 2 times 3 gives me 6. 1 times 3 is 3. So now we're going to add our numerators. 3 plus 1 is 4, and we bring down our denominator 6. So our answer here is 4/6, which right away does not look like 2/3, but if we simplify it, meaning if we divide both sides of the fraction by the same number, so let's say these are both even numbers, so they can both be divided by 2. This will reduce the fraction, and we can see if we end up with 2/3. 4 divided by 2 is 2. 6 divided by 2 is 3, which indeed gives us 2/3. So A does work. Okay, now let's try B. 11/12 minus 1/4. 12 and 4, we need a common denominator here. And 4 can fit into 12, so we can just use 12. 11/12 is not changing, so we're just going to pull that 11 over. But 4 times 3 gives me 12, and 1 times 3 gives me 3. So now we need to subtract. 11 minus 3 is 8, and then we just pull down our denominator, 12, and we get 8/12. Now again, off the bat, it doesn't look like it doesn't look like 2/3, but we can simplify this fraction. So I'm going to simplify by dividing both sides by 4, because I know both sides, 4 can fit into both of those numbers. And 8 divided by 4 is 2. 12 divided by 4 is 3, which gives me 2/3. So B also works. Now, again, we just found two expressions that work with 2/3, but it's always a good idea to just go ahead and make sure that the other two do not equal 2/3, just to be safe. So you never know when there could be a typo or a mistake on the test, so you always want to be careful with that. So 3/5 plus 1/3. This is C. I'm moving on to C to see if this one equals out to 2/3. And here we need a common denominator. We're going to use 15 because we have 5 and 3, so 15 is a number that both of those can fit into. 3 times 5 is 15. 1 times 5 is 5. 5 times 3 is 15. And 3 times 3 is 9. So 9 plus 5 is 14. Bring down our denominator, 15. This number, there's no number that can go into both of these, so 15 is odd, so 2 can't fit into these, 3 doesn't fit into both of these, 4 doesn't, and so on. It just doesn't work. So 14/15 cannot be simplified, so that obviously does not work for this problem specifically. So let's just try D to finish this up. Let me put an X over C, that's not going to work. 7/8 minus 1/4. Again, we're going to find a common denominator here. 4 can fit into 8, so let's just use 8. 4 times 2 is 8. 1 times 2 is 2. And here we don't need to change anything. So that we're subtracting. 7 minus 2 is 5. And we bring down our 8. So here we end up with 5/8. Again, this cannot be simplified because 5 is a prime number, so the only number that can go into it is either 1 or 5. And if we divide both sides by 1, we end up with the same fraction. So there's nothing that we can divide both sides by in order to simplify, which means that D does not work. So now we know for sure that A and B are the answers for number 6. Okay. Let's look at number 7. Joe plans to play soccer at least 3 1/2 hours this weekend. If he practices 2 1/6 hours on Saturday and 1 1/4 hours on Sunday, will he meet his goal? Okay, so we need to take the two amounts of time that he plans on practicing each day and see if it adds up to his goal, which is 3.5. Okay, so 2 1/6 hours on Saturday and 1 1/4 hours on Sunday is how much he plans to practice. So let's see if these add up to his goal of 3.5 hours. So 6 and 4 need a common denominator, and in this case we can use 12. That would be the least common denominator. Okay, so 6 times 2 gives me 12. 1 times 2 gives me 2. 4 times 3, sorry if this is a little small. I just realized I'm writing kind of small. 4 times 3 is 12. 1 times 3 is 3. So now we're going to add 2 plus 3 is 5. And then we're not going to do anything to the denominator, just bring that 12 down. So our fraction portion is 5/12. And then 2 plus 1 is 3. So our answer is this is how many hours he is going to be practicing this weekend. But now let's look at our answer choices. We have 2 answers that are saying yes and 2 answers that are saying no, but let's read through all of them to make sure we're selecting the correct answer. Yes, he will practice a total of 3 5/12 hours, and 3 5/12 is greater than 3.5. No, he will practice a total of 3 5/12 hours, and 3 5/12 is less than 3 1/2. Well, that's not true, so that's definitely not the answer. Yes, he will practice a total of 3 7/12 hours, and 3 7/12 is greater than 3.5. Well, we came up with the answer of 3 5/12, so that's not the answer either. And then this one says no, he will practice a total of 3 7/12, and we know that's not the answer either because we got 3 5/12. So the answer here is going to be A. Okay? All right. Number 8. Okay. Jack is 5 and 7/9 feet tall. Jeff is 5 5/6 feet tall. How much taller is Jeff than Jack? So the question is asking us how much taller is Jeff than Jack. So Jeff is obviously the taller person. Just think about the way they worded the question. How much taller is Jeff than Jack? So Jeff is taller. So if Jeff is taller and we need to find the difference between these two, we should put the larger or the taller person on first, because whenever we're subtracting, let's say we want to do 3 minus 2. We wouldn't set it up like this and put the smaller number on top, because then how can you do 2 minus 3? You can't. So you always want to make sure you put the larger number on top here like this. Okay, so again, going back to this problem, we want to put the larger number on top. So Jeff is taller, so we're going to put Jeff's height on top because it's the bigger number, 5 5/6. And Jack is 5 7/9. So we're just subtracting to find the difference. So we have 6 and 9 as our two denominators. So let's find a common denominator here. 18 works because 6 times 3 is 18. And 5 times 3 is 15. 9 times 2 is 18. 7 times 2 is 14. So we're subtracting. 15 minus 14 is 1. And we just pull down our denominator, 1/18. 5 minus 5 is 0. So we actually just end up with 1/18 of a foot. So that's not very much, but that is how much taller Jeff is. So let's look back at our answers here. We have 1/18 of a foot is letter A, so that is our correct answer. Okay, just a simple subtraction. Okay, let's look at number 9. Allie mixes, okay, looks like a typo. So Allie makes trail mix with 4/9 of a cup of raisins and 2/5 of a cup of peanuts. From this mixture, she gives 1/3 cup of the trail mix to her friend. How much trail mix is left for Allie to eat? Okay, so this looks like it's complicated, but it really isn't. Just stay with me here. So the first thing that we need to do is find how much total trail mix Allie has. So this is what she made her trail mix out of: raisins and peanuts. So 4/9 of a cup plus 2/5 of a cup. We need to get the total amount she made altogether. So we need to add these two. We need to find a common denominator. So common denominator here is probably just going to be 45. 9 times 5 is 45, so that works. So here we're going to do 5 times 9 is 45. 2 times 9 is 18. 9 times 5 is 45. 4 times 5 is 20. So if we add these two together, 20 plus 18, we get 38 45ths of a cup of trail mix. But that's not the end of the problem. Now, from this mixture, meaning from the 38 45ths of a cup, she gives 1/3 of it to her friend. Okay? So now what we need to do is take that 38 45ths, which is her total, and we need to subtract 1/3, which is how much she gave away. Okay, so we're just subtracting now. A common denominator between 3 and 45 is actually going to be 45. 3 can fit into 45, so that works. 45 will be our common denominator here. So 38 will just move right over there. And 3 times 15 is 45. And 1 times 15 is 15. So now we just subtract. 38 minus 15 is going to be, well, let's do this off to the side because that's not an easy one to do in your head, right? 8 minus 5 is 3, and 3 minus 1 is 2. So it's going to be 23 45ths of a cup. That should be how much she has left. So let's make sure that that's one of our answer choices. 23 45ths of a cup. And there it is. Letter C is our answer for number 9. Okay. So let's move on. We're on the last page now. Number 10. Okay. So Seth works at a grocery store and makes a chart of the weight of apples in ounces. What is the total weight? I'm underlining total. What is the total weight of the apples he weighs? Okay, so first thing is, if we want to know the total weight of apples, how many apples are we adding together? Remember that when we plot data on a line plot, each X represents one item. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 apples altogether. So there's 6 apples total, which means I need to be adding up 6 numbers in order to find the total. So I just need to make sure that I have 6 numbers lined up before I add them to make sure that I have all of the apples in my math problem. Okay, so first we have 1/2 an ounce, and there's 3 apples listed there. So it's going to be 1/2 plus 1/2 plus 1/2. That takes care of those 1, 2, 3 apples there. 1/2, 1/2, 1/2. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. We have 1 ounce. There's 2 apples listed there. So that's going to be 1, 2. Let me move my paper down a little. Okay, so that's those 2 apples there. 1, 2, both at 1 ounce each. Okay, so the last one we have here is 1 1/2. And we need to add all these up. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 apples total. So now we have all the measurements. Now we just need to add them all up. So there's a couple ways you could do this. With easy measurements like 1 and halves, you can almost do it in your head. So 1/2 plus 1/2. I'm going to show you 2 ways to do this. So if this doesn't make sense to you, don't worry about it. 1/2 plus 1/2 is obviously 1. And then if you take this 1/2 and add it to this 1/2, it equals 1. And then we can just add up our whole numbers. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and you end up with 5 ounces. Okay, so that may make sense to some of you, and if it doesn't, no problem, because you can just add up your fractions the way that you normally do. So 1/2, 1/2, 1/2, then we have 1, 1, and 1 1/2. So we can just look at our 4 fractions here, pretend the whole numbers aren't even there. Actually, I'm going to get a piece of paper and cover those up. So just look at your fractions for right now. Add up your numerators, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we end up with 4/2. That's improper, so we have to turn it into a mixed number. 2 goes into 4 twice. 2 times 2 is 4. Subtract, and we get 0. So we have a whole number of 2. Our fractions added up to the number 2, which makes sense because 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1, and 1/2 plus 1/2 is 1. 1 and 1 is 2. So a couple ways you could have done that, but our fractions add up to 2, and then our whole numbers are 1, 2, 3. So 3 plus 2 is 5 ounces. So either way, you get the same answer. But in the end, there's only one answer here, and it is 5 ounces. Okay. All right, 2 more to go. Number 11. So let's cover up that one. Yeah, there we go. Okay, number 11. Which number completes the equation? Okay, so if you can't tell, this is a blank space here. They need you to fill in that blank spot. So I'm going to make this a little bit bigger here. 5 4/5 minus 3 and blank over 12 equals 2 33/60. Okay, so all you have to do here is, the first thing you would want to do is set it up vertically like we always do. 5 4/5, 3 and blank over 12. I'm just going to leave it blank. Subtracting, and we end up with 2 33/60. Well, for starters, 5 and 12, it's not 60. So we're going to have to first find common denominator and make it 60. In order to end up with an answer where the denominator is 60, we have to make the 2 fractions we're working with have the denominator of 60. So let's start with that. 12 times 5 gives us 60. We still don't know the top, so we're going to leave that blank. And 5 times 12 gives us 60. 4 times 12 is 48. Okay, so now we need to figure out 48 minus what would give us 33. Okay, so all we have to do really is take 48 off to the side, subtract 33. So we're taking 48 from the problem and 33 from the answer and subtracting them. 8 minus 3 is 5. 4 minus 3 is 1. So now we have 15. So 48 minus 15 would give us 33, but now we need to figure out what number should go here. Now look at the bottom here. We have 12 times 5 give us a 60. We should be doing the same thing on the top here. So blank times 5 gives us 15. The answer should be 3, because 3 times 5 gives us 15. And that should make our answer correct. So I just like to go ahead and double check my answer, make sure that if it was 5 4/5 and 3 3/12, that it would actually work out. 12 times 5 is 60, 3 times 5 is 15, 5 times 12 is 60, 4 times 12 is 48, 48 minus 15, let's see, 48 minus 15 gives us 33, so it would be 33/60 and 2. So that actually works out perfectly. The answer up here should be 3. Okay, so we would just put 3 off to the side and circle it maybe for that answer, okay? This is one you may have to do a couple times, or at least watch a couple times in order to make sure you got it, but that's what the videos are for. You can do that, okay? So let's move on to 12, and you can stay on that one if you need to. Okay, last one, number 12. Does the mixed number 4 7/8 make each equation true. Circle yes or no. So really we just have to solve both of these problems. 3 2/3. I'm starting with this one here. I'm just going to call this A. I'm going to call this B. So we're starting with A. 3 2/3 plus 4 7/8. Remember, we're taking this problem from the instructions and kind of placing it here. And we're also going to place it in this blank too. 4 7/8. We're adding. Okay, so we need to find a common denominator here. 8 and 3, we can use 24. Okay, 3 times 8 is 24. 2 times 8 is 16. 8 times 3 is 24. 7 times 3 is 21. And we're adding here. So 21 plus 6. Okay, 6 plus 1 is 7. 1 plus 2 is 3. 37, we bring down the 24. And then 4 plus 3 is 7. So 37/24 is an improper fraction. So let's turn it into a mixed number. 24 goes into 37 once. 24 times 1 is 24. Subtract. 7 minus 4 is 3. 3 minus 2 is 1. So our mixed number here ends up being 1 13/24. Our whole number 1 should go over here to the whole number side, go above the 7, get carried there. And then our fraction will become part of our answer, 13/24. 7 plus 1 is 8, so our answer should be 8 13/24. And here we have 8 13/24, so that does work. That is a yes. Okay, so if 4 7/8 were to be on this blank, that equation would be true. All right, so let's try B. And B has 3 fractions in it. So 1/3 plus 1 3/4 plus 2 19/24. One thing I really want to point out to you is, do you see how when I'm lining them up, I'm lining up the fractions on one side and the whole numbers on the other side? That's really important because especially this one here, this doesn't have a whole number for its placeholder, so you're going to have to actually think about putting the fractions all in one line and the whole numbers all in the other line. So just keep that in mind. All right, so here we need to find a common denominator. And luckily, 3 can fit into 24 and 4 can fit into 24, so we can actually just use 24. Okay, down here we don't need to do anything to this fraction. 4 times 6 is 24. 3 times 6 is 18. 3 times 8 is 24. 1 times 8 is 8. So now let's add these all up. Okay, 8 plus 8 is 16. 16 plus 9 is going to be 25. And then we bring down our 24. And then 2 plus 1 is 3. But here again, we end up with an improper fraction. So let's turn this into a mixed number. 24 goes into 25 once. 24 times 1 is 24. Subtract. 5 minus 4 is 1. So we end up with 1 1/24. Okay, the fraction turns into part of our answer. And the whole number, 1, gets carried over here on top of the 3. 3 plus 1 is 4, so our answer becomes 4 1/24. It says 4 7/8 should be in the blank. So if 4 1/24 is the answer here, those do not match. So that is going to be a no. All right. So please keep in mind that you can go back and rewind certain parts of this. Just go back and review certain numbers. You can ask me for help when you need it, but this is going to be really helpful for you to go over at home when you're studying for your test. But please do take advantage of this video and go back and review whatever you need to. You can come up with practice problems as well to help yourself. You could even do that with a friend. Make a practice problems for each other and then switch. That would be a great way to practice as well outside of math class. So hopefully this review is helpful for you and it will help you prepare for your test. All right, good luck, guys.